Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something, well, it's a little bit tricky and it might hit close to home for some of us. Self-awareness. I mean, we all like to think we're pretty self-aware, so.
Yeah.
But, the deeper you dig into it, the more you realize there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes it so fascinating. It's one of those things that seems simple on the surface, but the more you explore it, the more complex it becomes.
Right. And to help us really unpack all those complexities, we've got a great mix of sources today. We've got some YouTube videos from channels like Psych2Go and alux.com. We even found a TEDx talk by Tasha Urich, who's a researcher who's really dug deep into the science of self-awareness. So should we jump right in?
Let's do it. I'm excited to see what these sources have to offer.
Okay, cool. So our first source is actually a Psych2Go video, and it's called 10 Signs You Might Be Lacking Self-Awareness. They present it as this kind of quiz, which I thought was a fun way to, get us started. It's like, do any of these sound familiar? It's not about judging ourselves. It's just about, starting to notice those potential blind spots.
Yeah, I like that approach. Because, the goal here isn't to make anyone feel bad. It's to help us all become more aware of ourselves and how we operate in the world.
Totally. And some of the signs they highlight are actually pretty surprising. Like one of them is having trouble explaining why you do the things you do.
Yeah, that's a big one. I think it really gets to the heart of what self-awareness is all about and understanding your motivations. If you've never really taken the time to explore those inner drives, those underlying reasons for why you act the way you do, then of course it's going to be tough to explain your actions. Like trying to give someone directions to a place you've never been to yourself. You might be able to get them close, but you're not going to be very accurate.
That's a great analogy. Another one that caught me off guard was the link between self-awareness and empathy. I always thought of empathy as being about kindness, just being nice to people. But it seems like there's a lot more to it than that.
Oh, for sure. Empathy goes way beyond just being nice. It requires a deep understanding of your own emotional landscape. If you haven't taken the time to really explore your own feelings, how they arise, how they manifest, then it becomes much harder to truly grasp what someone else might be experiencing because you haven't really walked through your own emotional terrain. So how can you guide someone else through theirs?
That is so insightful. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've touched on a few signs of low self-awareness. The next Psych2Go video we're diving into focuses on, the flip side. 10 things only self-aware people do. And it's almost like, they're giving us a roadmap for how to become more self-aware. It's like, okay, if I start doing these things, then I'll be more self-aware, right?
Right. But like we were talking about before we started recording, I think some of these are more like tools to develop self-awareness rather than, proof that you've already achieved it. It's like saying only fit people go to the gym. Well, yeah, but going to the gym is how you get fit.
Exactly. I think about journaling, for example. It's a fantastic way to become more aware of your thoughts and feelings. But it's not like only self-aware people keep journals, right? It's a practice. It's a tool for cultivating that awareness.
Yeah, exactly. And even though these aren't like foolproof signs, I do think they offer some valuable insights. One that stood out to me was that self-aware people tend to choose their words carefully.
Oh, yeah. That makes perfect sense. When you're really aware of how your words can impact others, you're going to be more deliberate with how you use them, right?
You develop this internal filter that helps you communicate more effectively and compassionately. And honestly, I think that carefulness with language comes from reflecting on times when you haven't chosen your words well. You've seen the negative consequences and you've learned from those mistakes. That's self-awareness in action, learning from your mistakes and adjusting your behavior accordingly.
It's a constant learning process, right? And speaking of learning in action, our next source is an alux.com video. This one's called 15 Ways to Develop Self-Awareness. And honestly, alux.com always has some pretty practical advice, so I'm excited to dig into this one.
Me too. They always have great tips.
Okay, so one of the suggestions that I found really intriguing was to try new things. Step outside of your comfort zone.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. It forces you to confront your limitations, your fears. And in that process, you discover a lot about yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses. It's like a crash course in self-discovery almost.
It really is. It's like putting yourself in a situation where you have to learn something new about yourself, whether you want to or not. So I'm curious, is there anything you've been wanting to try that would push you outside your comfort zone?
Well, I've always been fascinated by astronomy, but I haven't gone much further than reading a few books. I think signing up for a beginner's course at the local observatory would be a cool way to explore that interest and, challenge myself in a new way.
That's awesome. See, we're already putting this into practice. Okay, so we've talked about recognizing low self-awareness, adopting practices to cultivate it, and even trying new things to push our boundaries.
Yeah.
But here's where things get really interesting and maybe a little counterintuitive. One of the videos, along with a TEDx talk by Tasha Eurich, brought up the concept of, like, too much self-awareness.
Yeah, that's an important point. We tend to think of self-awareness as this absolute good, like the more the better. But like anything else, it can be taken to an extreme.
Really? I mean, what could be so bad about knowing yourself too well?
Well, think about what happens when self-awareness kind of tips over into obsessive self-analysis, right? Instead of using that knowledge to grow and improve, you get stuck in this loop of overthinking and self-criticism. It can become paralyzing.
So instead of self-awareness being the source of motivation, it becomes a source of anxiety.
Exactly. And Tasha Eurich, in her research, actually talks about this. She uses the term rumination. It's that tendency to kind of endlessly replay past mistakes or worry about future scenarios. And it's exhausting, and in the end, it's just not productive.
Oh, man, I know that rumination rabbit hole all too well. So how do we find that sweet spot? How do we become self-aware without getting lost in a maze of self-doubt?
Well, Tasha Eurich gives a great piece of advice. She says to ask what instead of why. It's about shifting your focus away from dwelling on the reasons behind something and more towards, exploring what you can learn from it and what you can do differently next time. It's a subtle shift, but it can make a huge difference.
Okay, so let's say, I don't know, you gave a presentation at work and it totally bombed. Instead of asking yourself, why am I such a terrible presenter?
Yeah.
You would ask,
what aspects of the presentation didn't land well and what can I do to improve next time? You're moving from a mindset of self-blame to a mindset of, constructive action.
that is such a powerful reframing. It's like self-awareness becomes less about judging yourself and more about understanding yourself so you can, take positive action.
Exactly. And this actually brings us to another fascinating aspect of self-awareness, which is its impact on leadership. Tasha Eurich found in her research that self-aware leaders actually create more profitable companies.
Wait, seriously? Sign me up for whatever they're doing. But how does self-awareness translate into, better leadership?
Well, think about the qualities we've been discussing. Understanding your motivations, choosing your words carefully, being open to feedback, learning from mistakes. These are all essential skills for effective leadership, wouldn't you say?
That's so true. A leader who is aware of their own strengths and weaknesses can build a team that complements their skills rather than trying to be good at everything themselves, right?
Exactly. And a leader who's really in tune with their emotions can navigate conflict more effectively and create a more positive and supportive work environment. Plus, being open to feedback allows them to continuously learn and grow, which sets a powerful example for their team.
So it's not just about personal growth. It's about, this ripple effect that positively impacts everyone around you.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like a superpower that makes you a better leader, colleague, friend, and human being. And it doesn't stop there. A few of the videos we watched also highlighted the connection between self-awareness and self-discipline.
Interesting. I wouldn't have immediately put those two together. What's the link there?
Well, Alex.com made a really good point. They said that self-discipline is essentially about, controlling your impulses, your behaviors. But in order to do that effectively, you first need to be aware of those impulses. You need to understand what triggers your, unhealthy habits and what motivates you to stay on track. It's like self-awareness gives you the map, and self-discipline provides the vehicle to navigate that map.
So self-awareness helps you understand why you want to make a change, and self-discipline gives you the tools to actually make it happen.
Precisely. It's a powerful combination for achieving your goals and, living a more intentional life. But here's where things get a little paradoxical.
Uh-oh, I sense a plot twist.
Yeah.
Are you saying there's a downside to self-awareness even when it's not taken to the extreme?
You got it. Two of the videos we looked at, The Terrible Paradox of Self-Awareness and POV, You're Too Self-Aware and You Hate It, they both explored this concept. It seems that even in healthy doses, self-awareness can have its challenges.
So is self-awareness a blessing or a curse? Sounds like it can be both.
That's the paradox. The more self-aware we become, the more aware we become of our, shortcomings. We see our flaws, our inconsistencies, the gap between who we are and who we want to be. And that can be incredibly uncomfortable.
Ignorance is bliss until you start peeling back the layers and realize all the ways you're falling short.
Yeah.
No wonder some people avoid self-reflection.
Right. And if we're not careful, that discomfort can lead to shame, self-doubt, and even paralysis. It's the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. And that can be really daunting.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. So how do we navigate this paradox? How do we embrace self-awareness without letting it turn into like a source of negativity?
I think the key lies in self-acceptance. It's about acknowledging your flaws and imperfections, not as reasons to beat yourself up, but as opportunities for growth. It's about recognizing that you're a work in progress, and that's okay. Everyone is.
So self-awareness illuminates the areas where you need to improve, but self-acceptance gives you the permission to be imperfect in the process. It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. It's about striking that balance between striving for growth and being kind to yourself along the way. And this actually leads us to one of the most powerful videos in our stack, which is titled The Power of Self-Awareness.
Yeah, this one was a bit intense, but it really illustrates the power of honest self-reflection, even when it's triggered by an external source.
It does. It tells the story of a man who was basically forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about himself, thanks to a rather blunt but insightful professor.
Yeah, this professor did not sugarcoat anything. But it sounds like that tough love was exactly what the guy needed to jumpstart his self-awareness journey.
It was. The professor acted as a kind of mirror, reflecting back the man's less desirable traits and forcing him to take responsibility for his actions. And this is where Carl Jung's concept of the shadow self comes into play, which I think we'll discuss in more detail later.
The shadow self. Okay, now we're getting deep. What exactly does that mean?
Well, Jung believed that everyone has this kind of shadow self, right? It's this hidden part of our personality that contains all the aspects of ourselves that we deem unacceptable or undesirable. The parts we try to hide, both from others and often from ourselves.
So like our inner critic is just the tip of the iceberg. There's this whole hidden world of repressed emotions and unacknowledged desires lurking beneath the surface.
Precisely. And according to Jung, the path to wholeness involves integrating our shadow selves. It's about acknowledging those darker aspects, not to condone them, but to understand them and ultimately transform them into something positive. It's about embracing the full spectrum of who we are, both the light and the shadow.
Wow, that's profound. But how do we even begin to access this shadow self? It sounds kind of terrifying.
It can be intimidating for sure, but it's also incredibly liberating. And one way to start is through, honest self-reflection. Ask yourself, what are the qualities in others that trigger strong negative reactions in me? Often, those qualities reflect aspects of our own shadow selves that we've disowned or rejected.
So the things that annoy us most about others are often the things we're trying to hide in ourselves.
Exactly. It's a powerful insight that can help us understand our triggers and work towards greater self-acceptance. But before we go too deep into the shadow self, let's bring it back to the listener. Why should they care about all this? What's the relevance of this in their everyday lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, I think the answer is pretty simple. Self-awareness is the key to living a more fulfilling and authentic life. It's about understanding yourself so you can make choices that align with your values, build stronger relationships, and ultimately become the best version of yourself.
Beautifully said. It's about taking ownership of your life rather than feeling like you're constantly reacting to external circumstances.
Okay, so we've covered the signs of low self-awareness. We've talked about practices to cultivate it. We've explored the potential pitfalls of too much self-awareness. And we've even touched on the concept of the shadow self.
Yeah.
That's a lot to digest. But I think it all boils down to one key takeaway. Self-awareness is a journey, not a destination.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong process of exploration and growth. And as we move forward in our deep dive, we'll explore more practical tools and strategies for navigating that journey, with clarity, compassion, and a sense of adventure.
Sounds good to me. So, listeners, as we move into the next part of our deep dive, I encourage you to reflect on what we've discussed so far. What resonated with you the most? What surprised you? And what new insights are you taking away from this conversation? We'll be back in a moment to continue our exploration of self-awareness.
It's amazing how we started with this idea of self-awareness as a pretty basic concept. And now we're uncovering all these layers and complexities.
I know, right? It's like peeling back the surface and finding this whole universe underneath.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this deep dive so engaging. It's not just about understanding a definition. It's about exploring the human experience, in all its messy and contradictory glory.
For sure. Speaking of messy and contradictory, we talked about the paradox of self-awareness in the last part. How sometimes knowing yourself better can actually lead to discomfort or even anxiety.
Yeah, and that's where self-compassion comes in. It's recognizing that we're all works in progress and that it's okay to not have all the answers.
So self-awareness shows us where we need to improve,
Yep.
and self-compassion gives us permission to be imperfect in the process.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance, between striving for growth and being kind to ourselves along the way.
Okay, so we've explored the what and the why of self-awareness. Now let's dive into the how. What are some practical tools and strategies we can use to cultivate more self-awareness in our daily lives?
Well, a lot of the videos we watched offered some really fantastic suggestions. Remember that alux.com video, 15 ways to develop self-awareness? They had some super practical tips.
Yeah, that was a good one. I especially like their emphasis on self-discipline.
That might seem like an unexpected connection, right? But they made this great point about how self-discipline helps you stay focused on what's truly important. And that focus is essential for self-awareness. When you're constantly distracted by external stimuli or even just your own internal chatter, it's hard to tune into your own thoughts and feelings.
So it's like self-discipline creates the space for self-awareness to kind of flourish.
Precisely. It's about cultivating that mental environment where you can actually hear your own inner voice.
And speaking of unexpected connections, they also suggested reading more fiction as a way to boost self-awareness.
Oh, yeah. That one intrigued me too. But it makes sense when you think about it. When we immerse ourselves in fictional stories, we kind of step into the shoes of other characters. We experience the world through their eyes, and we learn to understand their motivations, even when they're really different from our own.
That's so true. It's like a workout for your empathy muscles.
Exactly. And as we've discussed, empathy is a key component of self-awareness. The better we are at understanding others, the better we'll understand ourselves.
Another video that had some great tips was how to grow your self-awareness from the Mindset Mentor podcast. They really emphasize the importance of just paying attention to your thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, it might sound basic, but it really is foundational. You can't become more self-aware if you're not even aware of what's going on inside your own head.
Right. And they suggested some simple exercises, like asking yourself throughout the day, what was I just thinking? Or why am I feeling this way? It sounds so simple, but I bet it's really effective.
It is. It's like taking your mental temperature throughout the
Yeah.
day. Just taking those few moments to pause and check in with yourself can make a huge difference.
They also made a really important distinction between self-awareness and self-consciousness, which I think a lot of people get confused.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Self-awareness is about understanding yourself, while self-consciousness is about being overly concerned with how other people perceive you.
Right. And too much self-consciousness can lead to anxiety, insecurity, and even like paralysis. You're so worried about making a mistake or being judged
Yeah.
that you end up holding yourself back.
Exactly. So finding that balance is key. Be aware of your thoughts and feelings, but don't let them become a source of shame or self-judgment. It's about understanding, not judging.
Now let's circle back to leadership for a minute. We touched on it earlier, but there was this TEDx talk called 3 Strategies for Becoming More Self-Aware that had some really specific insights into how self-awareness can make you a more effective leader.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one. I really connected with the speaker's point about how just asking yourself why isn't always helpful. Like we talked about before, getting stuck in the why can actually lead to more rumination and self-blame.
Right. And instead of asking, why did I fail?
Mhm.
Why, she suggested asking what questions, which focus on like action and solutions.
Yeah.
It's shifting from a mindset of self-criticism to a mindset of learning and growth.
Exactly. So instead of dwelling on why something went wrong, you ask yourself, what can I learn from this experience? What can I do differently next time? It's much more empowering.
And I think that's a key takeaway for anyone, not just leaders. It's about using self-awareness as a tool for positive change rather than a weapon for self-destruction.
I love that. Another strategy she emphasized was seeking feedback from others.
Yeah, feedback can be hard to hear sometimes. But it's so valuable, right? It gives you that outside perspective on yourself and helps you identify those blind spots that we all have.
And she stressed the importance of getting feedback from people who, really know you well and who you trust, to be honest with you, not just the people who are going to tell you what you want to hear.
Right. You want feedback that's constructive, even if it's not always flattering. It's about growth, not ego stroking.
Exactly. And remember, you don't have to agree with every piece of feedback you get. It's about taking in the information, reflecting on it, and deciding what resonates with you.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of practical tips and strategies for cultivating self-awareness. But there's one more concept I want to explore, and it's a bit of a tough one. Internal conflicts.
Ah, yes, the battle within. It's something we all experience to some degree.
Yeah.
And it's definitely connected to the idea of the shadow self that we talked about before.
Right. When we have like conflicting desires or beliefs, it can create a lot of inner turmoil. It's like there are different parts of ourselves fighting for control.
And that's where ego strength comes in. It's the ability to, manage those internal conflicts effectively, to kind of integrate those different parts of ourselves into a cohesive whole.
So ego strength is like the intermediator, the peacemaker within.
Precisely. It's that ability to hold space for all those different voices, to acknowledge their validity, and to ultimately make choices that align with our highest good.
That sounds incredibly challenging. Is ego strength something we're born with, or can we develop it?
The good news is it's a skill that can be cultivated. And one of the most effective ways to do that is through mindfulness practices.
Mindfulness keeps coming up in our deep dive. What's the connection to ego strength?
Well, when we practice mindfulness, we learn to observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment. And we create space between ourselves and our internal conflicts, which gives us more freedom to choose how we respond rather than just reacting automatically.
So mindfulness helps us become the CEO of our own minds. We're not just at the mercy of our thoughts and emotions. We can actually step back and choose how we want to engage with them.
Exactly. We learn to lead ourselves with more wisdom and compassion.
I love that analogy. It's about taking ownership of our inner world, just like we strive to take ownership of our outer world.
And that's where self-compassion comes in again. It's about being kind to ourselves, especially when we're struggling with those inner battles.
Right. We need to treat ourselves with the same understanding and empathy that we would offer a close friend who's going through something tough.
Exactly. That inner kindness gives us the resilience and strength to face our challenges.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of tools and strategies for developing self-awareness. Self-discipline, empathy, mindfulness, feedback, managing internal conflicts, and of course, self-compassion. That's a lot.
It is, but it all comes back to that core idea. Self-awareness is a journey, not a destination. It's a lifelong process of exploration and growth.
And it's a journey worth taking, even with all its challenges and, paradoxes. So let's dive back into the videos and see what other insights we can uncover. All right, so we've gone over a bunch of practical strategies for like really building up that self-awareness muscle. But, I think it's time to maybe get a little more personal. One video that really stuck with me was the terrible paradox of self-awareness from, I think it was the Pursuit of Wonder channel.
Yeah, that one caught my eye too. It sounds like they're getting into that tension we've been talking about, right? How even when self-awareness is a good thing, it can still have some downsides.
Exactly. And they brought up this guy, Fernando Pessoa, a Portuguese writer and philosopher, to kind of illustrate that whole paradox. I'll be honest, I'd never heard of him before. But the way they talked about his work, it was super interesting.
Oh, yeah, I've read a bit of Pessoa. He's really into exploring, themes of identity and consciousness and, the whole search for meaning, which all ties in perfectly with self-awareness.
Totally. And the video really focused on his book, The Book of Disquiet. It's basically just a collection of his thoughts and reflections, almost like a mega journal or something. It sounds like he was constantly trying to understand himself, like always dissecting his own experiences.
That definitely sounds familiar, right? It's like that's what the self-awareness journey is all about, constantly exploring and examining our inner world. And sometimes it's exciting and sometimes it can feel like a bit much.
For sure. And the video pointed out how Pessoa's work shows both the good and the bad of self-awareness. Like the good part is that ability to look inward, to really get those nuances of your thoughts and feelings.
But then the not so good part comes from realizing that, well, you can never truly know yourself completely. The more you learn, the more you realize there's so much you don't know.
And that gap between what you know and what you don't know, sometimes that can create a lot of anxiety. Like even a feeling of emptiness sometimes, like that saying, the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. You feel like you're always chasing something you can't quite catch.
That's why self-acceptance is so important, right? It's about accepting the mystery, the unknown, the fact that who you are is always changing.
It's not about getting to some perfect understanding of yourself. It's about enjoying the journey, even with all the bumps in the road.
Speaking of bumps in the road, there was another video that caught my attention. It was called POV, You're Too Self-Aware and You Hate It, from a channel called Fads, I think. And it really seemed to be tackling that shadow side of self-awareness, like head on.
Yeah, I saw that one too. It started off with that classic line, know thyself, which we always assume is the key to happiness, right?
Yeah.
But this video was actually questioning that. It kind of made me wonder if there are times when, honestly, maybe ignorance is bliss.
It's true. Our brains are wired to find explanations. We want to make sense of the world, including ourselves. But sometimes there just isn't a simple explanation. Sometimes you just feel what you feel, and trying to overanalyze it just makes things more confusing.
They made a really good point. They said that sometimes overthinking things, like trying to analyze every little feeling, can actually take you further away from self-awareness. You get so caught up in figuring everything out that you lose touch with, what you're actually experiencing in the moment.
You get stuck in your head, and sometimes the answer is just letting yourself feel what you feel without judgment.
Exactly. And I think that's where self-acceptance is so powerful. It's about acknowledging your thoughts and feelings without needing to change them or explain them.
Mm.
It's about being okay with the messiness of being human.
It's recognizing that those imperfections, those flaws, are part of what makes you unique. Without them, you wouldn't be you.
Okay, before we wrap things up, I want to share one more video that really hit me hard emotionally. It's from the TEDx Asheville channel called The Power of Self-Awareness. It's with this guy, William L. Sparks, and he tells this incredibly powerful story about a time in his life when he really had to face some hard truths about himself.
I love a good personal story. It always helps to remember that we're not alone in this, It makes these big concepts feel more real and relatable.
Right. So Sparks was in this doctoral program, and his first assignment was to write about a recent divorce. And he chose to focus on the role of codependency in the relationship.
Whoa, that's brave. It takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there like that, especially in an academic setting.
Yeah, no kidding. And his professor, Dr. Jerry Harvey, he was not one to sugarcoat things. He called Sparks into his office and basically told him straight up that he needed to take a deeper look at himself, that he was actually contributing to the codependency in his marriage.
That's direct. But sometimes we need that, right? That honesty can be tough to hear, but it can help us see things more clearly.
Totally. At first, Sparks was totally defensive, blaming his ex-wife and all that. But Dr. Harvey kept pushing him, telling him to look at his own patterns, his need to control, his need to always be right.
Sounds like Dr. Harvey was holding up a mirror and making Sparks see those parts of himself he'd been avoiding.
Exactly. And eventually, Sparks had this breakthrough moment where he realized, oh, wow, this guy's right. He realized that he had been contributing to the issues in his marriage. And that realization was painful, but it was also freeing.
It's amazing how these painful experiences can actually lead to growth. Sometimes you need to get knocked down to get back up stronger.
And Sparks actually said that this experience was like a turning point in his life. It set him on a path of self-discovery. He even ended up building a whole career around helping other people develop their self-awareness.
That's a beautiful story. It just shows that even the toughest times can lead to transformation.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into self-awareness, I want to leave you all with a few final thoughts. First and foremost, remember that self-awareness is a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs, moments of clarity, and moments of confusion. Just be kind to yourself through it all.
And don't forget, you don't have to do it alone. There are people out there, friends, family, therapists, coaches, online communities even, who want to support you on this journey. Don't be afraid to reach out.
And lastly, keep exploring. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's always more to learn and discover about ourselves. The tools and strategies we talked about today, those are just starting points. Experiment, see what works for you.
Self-awareness is an adventure, and it's one of the most rewarding adventures you'll ever take.
That's all for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep diving deep into the amazing world of self-awareness.